and welcome back to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today I'm joined by a person who needs no introduction, Lord Meghnad Desai, a member of the House of Lords in the UK, who's been a professor at the London School of Economics for over 38 years, has a career as an economist spanning over 50 years, 50 books, and is renowned for his absolutely insightful insights into how economics has influenced the globe. He is a recipient of the Padma Bhushan in 2008, and his most recent work, The Poverty of Political Economy, is what we're going to be talking about today. Without giving much away, let's jump right into the interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Hello, Meghnad. And I say that with all the disclaimer that over email, Meghnad particularly asked me to call him Meghnad. Otherwise, I'm enthralled by the fact that I got to call Lord Desai Meghnad. We're here today to talk about his new book and his love for reading and writing in general. But before we kick things off, Meghnad, could you just give us a quick summary of the book, the new book that you come out with, 30 seconds or a minute on it?
Well, the book is basically about understanding why regularly good economic policy is supposed to be giving income tax cut to the rich and cutting the welfare payments to the poor. Whenever there's a crisis, there's the sound economic policy, good economic policy, help the rich, punish the poor. And because the pandemic was going on and this was happening in UK, which is a rich country, I thought, what's going on? Every time there is a crisis, the same people suffer. And people just think that's normal. Where did this idea come from? So being an economist, I went a much more academic route to find out where this idea came from. I didn't want to say, oh, capitalism is always like that or something like that. So I had all the books on my shelf. I have 10,000 books in my old house. I've moved out of that, but so I'm a book buyer and a book reader. So I had all of Adam Smith there, all Ricardo there, Malthus there. So I started reading at the beginning of economics. I said, where in economics did that come from? So I finally found it. These are authors which everybody has read and everybody has analyzed, but nobody spotted this. So it basically nobody also spotted that the thing about this kind of economic belief has political roots. It was the politics of the period when the French Revolution started in 1789, and then England started fighting France. And the fear of the French Revolution might come to England and displace the monarchy and all that. That fear was very, very acute. There's a big debate going on. And it's a part of that which the reaction to how to deal with the poor and so on arose. So I have finally located the precise economic pressures on the poor law. I'll tell you about poor law in a minute. And how Malthus invented, and more or less made up, his theory of population. And its purpose was basically to say, don't give the money to the poor. If you give money to the poor, they'll only breed more people and they will themselves cancel the relief you are giving them. So be hard on the poor, just give them the minimum. And then Ricardo, who was an amazing economist, logically and theoretically, made it like a fundamental principle of economics, that the value of labor is just what the laborer eats and his family, and that's what determines the wage. And you can't alter the wage. If you give more wage, profits suffer, and if profits suffer, the economy suffers. So this connection once made, and because Ricardo was a very good logician, and fantastic, determined economics for the next 100 years. And so what I then do is, I say, the root of this is that the parliament was based on a 2% franchise in the whole population. Right. People who were voting were only the rich, and people who sat in parliament were only the rich, or the sons of the rich. And therefore, they were absolutely utterly uninterested in the poor. Right. And then it was the agitation for extending the franchise,
Mm-hmm.
which changed economics. So in a sense, normally people say economics determines politics. I have reversed the thing and saying, no, actually, if you look at history, it is a struggle for extending the franchise, which took 100 years in England, which finally in 20th century, early 20th century, created redistributive economics, as they call it, when people thought about how to increase the welfare of the poor and so on. So
Right.
the book is basically about economic thinking and political action, how they interacted to make us arrive at a stage where redistributive economics is possible. And then what I said, that unfortunately there were two kinds of redistributive economics proposed by accident, both from Cambridge, Pigou and Keynes, and how that debate, we wasted 50 years on that debate, or maybe more than that. But at least now let us retrieve. Now with the pandemic, we have to say, look, what matters in economics is the lives and livelihoods of people.
Right.
Value of, it basically has to be measured by, are you improving the lives and livelihoods of people? All people. And so I propose at the end that how to measure not just total GDP or per capita GDP, measure more than that.
Right.
Years left to live. Are you going to have a healthy life and for the whole population? So let us direct our attention and don't think of poverty only in terms of food, only in terms of
Right.
calories. Poor have a whole life.
Right.
Poor should be allowed to live a life. So that is the gist of it. So I want to improve the way economists think of poverty
Right.
and about wealth.
Yeah. That's a very fair summary, Meghnad. But when you were talking, I couldn't help but think of a couple of things, right? I mean, and here just to play the devil's advocate in this particular scenario, right? Because you do argue that essence of your argument is that we've economics has drifted from its core purpose, right? But one might argue back that the drifting has come on the end of political economy and not economics as a discipline at large, right? So do you see a but you did speak a lot about how politics also drove economics theory as well, right? I mean, one of the most fascinating bits that you spoke about in the earlier halves of your book is about Adam Smith's writing, right, where he speaks
So,
about, right, recognizing the value of the labor, of the effort that a person's putting in, and that having a direct impact in terms of people eventually recognizing the difference between wealth and income, that gold and silver isn't the measurement of what a jurisdiction's income is, and it's actually the value of what is being manufactured by the labor. So in that sense, do you see a distinction between political economy and economics as disciplines, or do you see them as largely the same, because politics is eventually guiding economics to that?
yeah. You see, the thing is, obviously, in one way, these are old and modern names of economics. Political economy is the old name of economics, and now we call it economics. We're thinking more of a science. Political economy is not a science, all that. But as far as this particular subject is concerned, I had to go to the origins of the subject with Smith and Ricardo, because what we know is that some of this, the whole notion of what is value and how do you measure value, was the question that Adam Smith took up. And as I said, Adam Smith, was a philosopher. He was a sort of a very humane person, and he said something very truthful, but he never laid it down as a dogma. This is why I say this is an inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
What he calls inquiry into the wealth of nations.
Right.
And the wealth of nations, he says, the productivity of the laborers.
Right.
And he's interested in the vast mass of people working and their welfare. And he doesn't like slavery. And he's got a very broad sympathy. Income, Malthusian and Ricardo, and they narrow the sympathy. They say, no, value is just this thing and nothing else. And the value is measured by the amount of bread the worker's family eats and how much hours it takes to make the bread. And so the value of workers' labor is the amount of labor to produce bread, and that's it, and that's a law. And so, and at one stage, I quote Ricardo said, "It's almost as certain as the law of gravity that weight should not be paid for." It's kind of very pretentious. Now, everybody agrees in economics that what Ricardo said is still valid. Keynes had a beautiful passage how what Ricardo said about there being no unemployment possibility, was like conquered Europe like Inquisition and all that. I mean, he's very dramatic way. But in a sense, those kinds of things in economics, I don't know the Ricardo. I can hear Chancellor of the Exchequer talking, and they talk the same language. Now, I wanted to know why. And so I have traced the roots of this belief to the poor law legislation, which was valid in the late 18th century, early 19th century. And then, I mean, it was actually a very interesting era in which the old era, before change, that every parish, like every district, was supposed to be responsible for the livelihood of all its citizens.
Right.
And so if somebody could not work, the parish had to provide the thing from church rates and Singapore rates. And the person who could work, so the paupers can't work, they were old or whatever it is, they're all right. But the workers had to have a wage which would keep their family reproducing itself, as it were. Now, this was done because you couldn't leave your parish and go anywhere else because you had to stay in your parish. This is pre-capitalism. Now, that is a very benevolent system. Once capitalism comes, that goes. And then, unfortunately, the poor law is still based on old beliefs. So then they said, you should never pay an able-bodied, unemployed person anything, make quite sure that he doesn't go around, looking for it. You put him in a workhouse. He and his family goes in a workhouse until he can find work. Charles Dickens writes about that very well. So that kind of misery that people who are able-bodied were able to work, certainly unemployment comes. And unemployment was not known in the 18th century, certainly. So the response to unemployment is a very harsh sort of welfare state. We call it welfare state, very harsh treatment of workers. And that has stayed. That is more or less, it may have softened a bit, but by and large, even in UK now, the big urgency is to cut income tax. Everybody, the government is saying, well, how soon can we cut income tax? The people are suffering from inflation and lack of income. They're not suffering from paying tax. So that has to be located into its underlying reason, and I look at it in the politics.
Right. Meghnad, it's I think it's impossible to have a conversation which mentions capitalism, unfair treatment to workers without the M word, that is Marx, being dropped into the conversation. Right. I mean, I noticed. Throughout the book also, you do mention Marx, and maybe Engels to a bit, but not a lot. Do you? So I mean, I just wanted to pick your brain as to what you think was their influence in terms of guiding this, say, like the ideal premise being, I mean, Malthus and Ricardo kind of took away the original interpretation of Smith's work. But then what role do you see for Marx and, like, let's say, following socialist and communistic economists in terms of framing policy?
I didn't want to bring Marx in this, not because I don't like Marx. I've written extensively on Marx.
Yes.
But what people are confused about, actually people who call us Marxists are Leninists. They have not read Marx. So Marx was utterly uninterested in economic policy.
Right.
He had absolutely no idea, no belief that the state could improve matters, that the reforms and policy. He just basically completely ignored how economic policies could be framed. He said something about factory acts and so on, but he said nothing about poor rates, because he basically was interested not in core, in the general dynamics of capitalism. And had I got into Marx, all kinds of people think they have read Marx. They go, but Marx really says such and such, or Trotsky says such and such. I think that this is really a problem of economics pre-Marx. And Marx took Ricardo so seriously that Marx was never going to contradict Ricardo. Marx more or less thought Ricardo was the greatest thing ever. And he also liked Ricardo, despite being very rich, was kind of tough on all this stuff. So Marx totally got bowled over by Ricardo. And I know all that. So I don't know. I don't want to get into that. What I do say is that Marx's idea that economics is the basis of politics, I'm sort of slightly subverting it. But I didn't make too much of it because I didn't want to be diverted into these other issues, which, in the 70s and 80s, it was terribly boring, going on and on about breakdown of capitalism and all that. I've done all that. And I've written enough about that. I've written a book called Marx's Revenge, which sorts all that out. So I wanted to not get into that because of problems of people's beliefs. I wanted to concentrate on what's thought to be sound economics, not ideologically Ricardo's versus the great God. And so I thought, actually, it's not even myself. I located it in Ricardo and Malthusian. And I thought, I got the answer. I don't need to go into Malthusian. Talk about poverty. Poor rent, nothing like that. He's not interested in this stuff. He basically wants to show that profit comes from exploitation. Even if everybody thinks that the worker gets a fair wage for a fair day's work, there's still profits. And he wants to explain how come worker willingly works and still the capitalist makes profits? What is the mechanism? And he used Ricardo to explain that. That's it. I can do that in my sleep. But that is not how policies are made now. Policies, Adam Smith and Ricardo and all. I first want to point out Adam Smith said nothing like that. Adam Smith is a very depressed person, and Ricardo and Malthus were the villains. So that I want to do. Adam Smith is my hero, and Marx is my hero, and I don't like Malthus and Ricardo. But I wanted to very much concentrate on origins of a certain fallacy in economic policy.
Right. So I'm going to fast forward a bit now to the last century, right? Like, I mean, as you mentioned, the time we wasted on the John Keynes versus Pigou debate. And I mean, to the extent that in the past 20 30 odd years, we have seen like the re-emergence of Pigouvian economics back with the Kyoto Protocol and things like those popping up. But there's an interesting anecdote that you mentioned about, I mean, not to frame it in any incorrect way, but sort of breakdown of Keynesian economics post the great financial crisis of 2008. And so so what I wanted to kind of ask you was, do you believe it to be an absolute breakdown to the extent that it would be eventually be replaced by a proper Pigouvian economics? Or do you see that the kind of state that we're presently in, where Keynesian economics is being fine-tuned with some more like Pigouvian ideals put into it? Is that the way forward according to you, or do you think we are completely broken down on the Keynesian side and this is something that a newer side that we'd have to take up?
I think, okay, that's a good question. Basically, on the Keynesian economics, I do this detailed thing about Keynes versus monetarist, because the big debate, everybody ignored Pigou, and they moved on to discussing Keynes. So Pigou was neglected. Very people read it. So I take up Pigou later on. First, I wanted to show how, even though there are two redistributive economics around, the one that was taken out, Keynes, got into all this controversy, and then the Americans got into it. So I just wanted to describe that whole process. My view is at the end of the 2008 crisis, more or less, both sides have been disgraced. Neither side could locate or predict this breakdown, this meltdown. And now the heat has gone at it. Okay, we know roughly what Keynesian economics is, we know what monetarists say, and there is no great thing about, oh, this is true, this is not true. We'll settle on. There are problems with both systems about forecasting. Right now, for example, internationally we have inflation, we have stagflation, and we're trying the same old stuff and not getting anywhere. There is no new thing in macroeconomics. The old things are there are ample, so we can go on trying that. But by and large, that is still the developed economies' problems. So basically, what I then shift the discussion to the things that the poverty, as is being now discussed, and basic income, and then really go to the human development issue. Human development is a way of measuring welfare, which is completely new, but it can be linked to the Pigou economics. And so I have, and my last chapter is the development of the Pigou argument in a way it would be relevant to and measurable in all economies. So my view is that now are interested in measuring welfare the Pigou way.
Right.
They are not just concentrating on full employment and low inflation, but they want to know about health and education and sort of quality of life and so on. So economics has now finally got to face that, and some of it is already being done. The Human Development Index, which is right now there, is much more simpler from my point of view. I was there developing it, so I know what this is. Richer, more details with longevity and health and so on included in the measure, so that we get a better idea of is the economy working for everybody or not.
Right.
The question is, don't worry about in India right now. Everybody says, "Oh, our total GDP is the fifth highest in the world," and so on. Well, thank you very much. That is because we got a billion people. What is the longevity? What is the health? What is the and let us also measure those, not just go on about total income. India's total income has always been high because people used to come, travelers for the Golconda, everything. But the people were poor. So let us not worry about the pearls and diamonds of the Mughal king. Let's worry about the ordinary people. So the last chapter is slightly more mathematical, but this is a way to measure. People have reborn the last chapter. But I think it would be possible. A lot of people are working on that. I'm not the only one working on that, but I put it all together.
Right. Okay, Meghnad, now I'm going to take a step back from the book and kind of focus on Meghnad the
Okay.
person, right? So you mentioned at the
Okay. Wow.
beginning that you are a book buyer, well, you classify yourself as a book buyer over a book reader. So I actually would want, and I've always believed that, every successful person, every person who's had thoughts worth listening to has always largely been a reader, right? So today I just wanted to kind of talk to you about, if you could tell us where your love for reading began, or I mean, can you trace it back? Was it your parents who kind of got you into reading, or was it always a
Yeah,
natural affinity?
I come from a family where everybody on a Sunday afternoon after a nice big lunch, we'd all be lying down and reading one or other. Everybody.
Right.
And I learned to read at the age of 3 or something like that. It's ridiculous. What was interesting in those days, we didn't actually possess many books. We didn't have walls filled with books. But somehow books came, we read them, and they went. It's like a circulating library,
Right.
from friends. And of course, this was in Baroda, and we knew a very famous Gujarati novelist, man called Meghnad Desai, who was a friend of my grandfather. And whenever he would write a new book, we would somehow get to read it and pass it on and so on. But basically, reading books was everybody read books. And when I was, in my teenage years, my uncles, my mother's brothers were saying, unless you have read Lasky, you're no good. You have to go read Lasky. You've got to go read Bernard Shaw. I basically just read and read and read. I had a morning college in my undergraduate years. So at the end of the morning, I will go back home. I would have the food brought in, spend the afternoon in a library. And I knew after a while, I could wander in the tracks of the library because people say, Tum jaake le aao. So I would just go and, if I'd not heard the name of an author, just take it and I read it. And so I just read and read and read. And then after a while, the Bombay University Library was there, and so on. So I own 10,000 books, which are in a store somewhere. But no, so reading extensively, magazines, newspapers, books, novels, serious books, it is just, without limit has been my life. I've written 50 books. I've written 50 plus books. So, and then we're going to more coming in. So reading is one of my greatest pleasures, or I shouldn't say, one of my regular habits.
Right.
And it's great fun. And, then as a professor, I did more economics. But even when I was doing economics, my colleagues were very surprised that I was doing lots of other things as well.
Right.
I've written plays, I've read plays and things like that, and all sorts of things. So it's fun.
Right. Actually, Meghnad, that makes me
Read,
think like that's sorry.
I think reading and writing is sort of life,
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
my life definitely is reading and writing.
I think it should be everyone's. But actually, Meghnad, what you said actually makes me ponder about something, right? Because by profession you're an economist, and you just said that your colleagues were often surprised that you were writing plays, and you mentioned you read novels and like all sorts of books. So, do you believe? I mean, what do you believe that people
Yeah.
ought to just read like non-fiction or fiction, or what's your take on this entire? I mean, there are a lot of people who speak about true reading is only when you read non-fiction and it enhances your knowledge, or I mean, people don't want to read non-fiction because fiction's the only way of consuming
But,
stories or something.
I think fiction is very interesting stuff. And I've read, of course, a lot of novels. All the time I've read a lot of novels. And what was interesting to me was that my first novel was about how to murder a British Prime Minister. It's called Dead on Time. Uh, and one interesting was I belong to the Labour Party. I used to belong to the Labour Party. And whenever Labour Party wins an election and gets into government, there are a lot of miserable people because they don't like winning. They want to be in opposition all the time. Anyway, so some people, I was having lunch with some friends, and one of them said, somebody ought to murder Tony Blair for doing what he's done. I said, I know, I'm really very unhappy that Labour had won. I said, pedantically, only one British Prime Minister has ever been murdered. So then we thought we'll all write a novel together and in different chapters. I went through how do we murder a British Prime Minister? So I sat down and I started writing. And before I know it, I had a plot and all that. Then I lost my manuscript and then I rewrote it. And Ruth Rendell, who is a very good crime writer, she was in the House of Lords. So I thought I better take some advice. So I said to her, Ruth, can I describe to you this plot? So the nice thing about novels are you have to juxtapose all sorts of things, in a limited amount of time, and all that. And after a while, she said, your problem, you are a chess player. You have this chess problem you want to solve, but you're not interested in the pieces. But why is this person doing this? I said, you give them background. Will you please give them background?
Right.
So it's a think about all these people and where do they come from, what are they wearing, what was, and I was very pleased that a really professional, crime story writer said to me, it will work. And, unfortunately, the person who published it went bust. He's a new publisher, he went bust. But it is now available from HarperCollins in India. It's called Data Time. And after that, each time I had an idea, I've written about 5 novels. I enjoy reading novels, writing novels very much. And because the whole different than academic writing.
Right.
because you're God. You're God. You create people. You give them
Right.
lives. You take them lives away and things like that. And my latest one is something called Maya Bharat, which is it's called the untold story of how Lord Krishna died, and it basically recreates the circumstance under which Krishna dies. But in a,
Okay.
I keeping most of the Mahabharata story intact, but in that into the range. And the question basically, which I thought much of my lifetime, why should a god ever die unless he wants to die?
That's fair.
How can a god die? So, and why did Krishna want to die? What happened and made Krishna want to die? So that started a whole chain of things. And look, it's very enjoyable because you can do what you like. It's a free license.
Right.
In economics, I had rules and previous to chair, and I used to write plays, but I don't write plays anymore.
So I just have a couple of last questions for you before I let you go. So I always hate asking authors their favorite book, and particularly voracious readers like you. But instead, what I want to ask you is that I really like to believe that individuals, there are certain books that you read over your lifetime which really impact you in terms of either shaping your worldviews or your personality or your maybe your in relations with other people. This might be a fiction book or a non-fiction book or like multiple books. So I mean, if I had to ask you that question, which books would come to your mind over the years? Are there any books that have stood the test of time for you, books that you keep going back to kind of, I mean, if you had to name a few books who defined Lord Meghnad Desai, which books would they be?
When I was a very small boy, there was a book by a man called K. Munshi, who was a novelist, Gujarati novelist.
Yes, yes.
He was also a politician. He wrote a book called Lord of Gujarat, Gujarat no Nath.
Okay.
The Nath of Gujarat no
Right.
Nath.
Right.
It was about Siddharth Jaisingh, and he was an amazing writer. And I would finish the book and I read 27 times. And when my father said, "Now I ban you from ever reading this book,"
Wow.
which he never did anything else. Anyway, then later on, I discovered Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen's plays. And I was just completely taken. I read Doll's House, and it kind of almost changed my life, And Doll's House basically was such an amazing author that he shatters all illusions. Makes you a rebel because he's a rebel. Doll's House is about a very happily married woman leaving her husband and walking out and all that. And then I got into, and then from then on, Tennessee Williams. Later on, I read novels, quite a lot of novels, but I wouldn't say that there is any particularly great. I mean, James Joyce, Ulysses, and I would read that again. But so now I read very few novels because I just don't read. But I like big, fat novels, which will keep me occupied for a long time and will
Right.
be fairly complicated because I want a sort of a broad canvas and lots of complications and things like that. And it's Norman Mailer is another author I like very much. Yeah. And so I'm trying to think of any other ones, but
Right. No,
quite
but
a lot.
these are more
I don't
than
know. Sorry, go
no,
ahead.
these are some fantastic ones, and I'm really surprised to hear that you read Nath of Gujarat 37 times. That's that's some dedication to reading that book.
K. Munshi was actually writing like Alexander Dumas. Everybody said, "Oh, you're copying from Dumas," but he had these very adventurous sort of characters,
Right.
and he more or less made up Gujarat history, glorified it much more. But Gujarat doesn't actually have a history, like the Marathas have. And he basically was all the amazing pride about Gujarat and the empire they had. They had no empire, but it was great fun. Imagine, and he has this beautiful the love affair between this soldier and this beautiful woman, and then very hard at romantic scenes. So he kept us all interested. And, well, amazing. And I read a lot of his novels, and he was very good. And, you know, I read a lot of Gujarati novels. I read some Marathi, and of course, Bengali, Sharat Chandra, the
Right.
great Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, is absolutely amazing. I mean, I prefer him to Tagore. I'm not into, Bengali poetry. You have to know Bengali to get Bengali.
Right.
You can't have in translation. But novels, you easily translatable. So I think Sharat Chandra is one of the greatest novelists of all times. And so I've read him quite a lot.
Right. Okay. So Meghnad, just to wrap up this.
Khandekar
Mhm.
in Khandekar in the 50s.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Meghnad, just to wrap up this interview, this has been absolutely fantastic. But I have one fun question which I ask all the guests on my podcast. Right. I mean, I believe in today's day and age, and most writers, uh, given how the internet has boomed, have become celebrities, if not many celebrities at the very least, and a lot of their lives are public in terms of what they do, what they like to do, things like that, right? And particularly goes out for you, a celebrated economist and a House of Lords member. But one fun question which I ask almost all guests on my podcast is that if you could tell us one thing about you which the world doesn't really know as of now, some fun anecdote about you or your life that you would like to share with us.
Ah, so many to share. Well, well, I guess I'm a failed actor.
Oh, okay.
I'm a failed actor. I would have liked to be. I mean, I have acted in my young days and so on, and I'm I would have liked to be a much more successful actor than I was. Uh, but somehow the chance never rose because I used to act in Gujarati plays. And then when I was in America, I even acted in some American plays. Uh,
Okay.
but then somehow it all worked out. And my acting career ended very early. And I had kept on with my acting career. I was not very good, but I was all right. And I would have been a good middling type actor with then character roles. Put on a beard or a glass, whatever. And I would have liked to have done that, but
Was
that didn't
this
happen.
was this ambition only for theater or was it for film as well? Would you be in seen
So
Meghnad Desai in Bollywood or Hollywood as well? Or was it just theater?
no. I have written on Bollywood. As you know, I wrote a book on Dilip Kumar, and
Right.
I've written a book on. And if you ever want to know anything about Hindi films of 1950s, call me
Mhm.
up and I will tell you precisely who was in which film and where it ran and all that. But I can't do contemporary film, but I know a lot about 45 to 65. 1945 to 1965 Hindi films,
Right.
and I know all about that.
Right.
I wish somebody would make a film of my books, but anyway, there we go.
Well, I hope that dream comes true someday and maybe you get to feature in that film as well. That would be two dreams coming true together. But
Okay,
thank you so much, Meghnad, for doing this. This was absolutely lovely. It was a great honor hosting you on this
thank
podcast, and
you, Siddharth.
I hope you enjoyed yourself just as much as I did. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Right.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all our social media platforms. We're available across all podcasting platforms on YouTube, on Instagram. You can find us at the rate Kitabi Karwan on Instagram or just search Kitabi Karwan on Google or a platform of your choice and you'll find us. We carry out Instagram lives, giveaways, we talk about books, we talk to bibliophiles, talk to authors, and basically try and create a reader's world through all of our platforms. Do check us out and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.